How does being in Saudi Arabia right after 9/11 affect your sense of the world and its challenges? Lisa Cheticle, who won a Pulitzer Prize for the Hartford Courant, has answers. She'll discuss them next on Global Perspectives.
This is Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to Global Perspectives. In today's uncertain, interrelated world, it's important to stay aware and engaged. Lisa Cheticle, an investigative journalist who is part of a Hartford Courant team that won a Pulitzer Prize, understands that necessity better than most. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thanks, John.
Tell us about how you got into journalism. Was this a career choice, something that happened by accident, or a little bit of both?
More by accident. I stumbled out of Wesleyan University with a degree in English, loving to write. Thought I might end up being a fiction writer, and then realized that I needed to support myself, so somehow wandered into a local weekly newspaper in New Haven, Connecticut called the New Haven Advocate, and asked if I could freelance a story. Bringing with me my writing sample was a term paper that I had written on Chaucer in college, but thought maybe my writing might be adaptable to this weekly newspaper, and I loved it. The first story was about a road repair project in East Haven, Connecticut. I reported it to death and loved the experience. Went from there to a daily newspaper, the New Haven Register, where I stayed 7 years, tried all kinds of reporting there, and then ended up at the Hartford Courant, which is the state's largest newspaper in Connecticut. Stayed there 16 years, did all kinds of reporting, and now adapting to the times. I am a co-founder of a news website in Connecticut called the Connecticut Health I-Team. So it's been my whole adult career, and I love it.
Well, we definitely want to come back to that a little bit later in the interview, but today we're interested in talking about the world outside of the United States and why it is and should be important to us, to our readers, to our viewers. You've had experience with that world in various ways, and today it seems that in some respects, even though we have more access to information than ever, we're more disconnected from the world. We don't seem to understand what's going on. What is your perception of what's going on and why?
Yeah, exactly what you said, and sort of sad from inside journalism, because what's happened is the two tracks. We do have so much more access to information about what's going on in other countries, other parts of the world, through the internet, and yet mainstream media has been hit by so many cutbacks that the reporters on the ground in those countries, I mean, when I started out in the 80s, even the Hartford Courant, which is not one of the big powerhouses in newspapers, but we would dispatch reporters to Ireland and Israel and Saudi Arabia. We were doing international reporting, and I'm sure, as you know, the larger newspapers all had foreign bureaus with just like beats that we cover locally. I mean, there were reporters who would go and immerse in cultures and report from all corners of the world. All those foreign bureaus have closed up, except for at some of the major newspapers, at a time when there's so much access to information. So, I mean, I'm lucky I sort of got to experience some of that when the newspaper industry was still strong, being sent around internationally. But now the number of mainstream media covering international affairs has shrunk. I'm not sure that we're seeing the kind of growth in alternative media to be able to carry that load. So it's worrisome. I mean, there is access to information now, to international news, but not from news sources where you know that professionals are producing it, and you know that people are taking time to report stories. There's a lot of sort of quick hits, and there's a lot of younger, inexperienced people sort of parachuting into places, writing about something. And often when you search the web for news on Syria or Saudi Arabia, it's hard to tell whether you're reading a sort of unbiased professional account of what's happening, or it's being filtered by somebody with, a group with political views. So I miss that, and I'm a little bit sad about that. My hope is still that we'll see a resurgence in international reporting, not from traditional newspapers, but from professional journalists finding other niches to tell those stories.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope you're right on that one. It just seems odd to me that at two junctures, one after the end of the Cold War, another after 9/11, that we didn't get inspired to cover international news more aggressively. After the Cold War, the world was certainly no longer in competition between East and West, Soviet Union and the United States, but there were more challenges out there than ever before. And then after 9/11, to me, surely that should have been the point at which we really, really began to pay more attention. But it didn't happen in the 90s, and it happened just briefly after 9/11. What do you think was the reason for that?
Why it didn't happen? I mean, I agree with you. It should have happened. I think what happened is it came at a time when, the media was sort of losing footing. And I also think there was a tendency to, with certainly 9/11 coverage, which I was part of, sort of hunker down in your territory and cover the effects of it, as opposed to sort of using it as an opportunity to reach out. I did do, actually, the year after 9/11, I ended up, I was still with the Hartford Courant, and I ended up spending a month in Saudi Arabia on assignment with the Courant. I think that I was one of a handful of American journalists who decided to go that route after the 9/11, and the reason why the Courant sent me was because I think 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. I think that was rare that the folks at a daily newspaper thought, because there was a huge local story at the time from all the victims in Connecticut and the New York area, but there were some editors, I think, who were looking outward, but I do think, unfortunately, what happened after 9/11, as happens after a lot of international events, is there's not that turning outward that you might expect. It's sort of like, let's do a couple of stories and then move back into our turf.
So you went to Saudi Arabia. What was that like? What was your initial reaction upon landing?
It was bizarre, John. It was bizarre because I went in sort of having read and I guess expecting that a year after 9/11, I would be going into a country that was remorseful and sympathetic to the U.S. I really did. I had no way of knowing. There wasn't much being written about what was going on within Saudi Arabia, and the photographer and I who ended up going really got sort of visa approval at the last minute. No Americans were going, and we sort of somehow got under the radar and got into the kingdom. So I expected it would be the 1-year anniversary that there would be sort of an outpouring of compassion for America. And I got there and almost within a day realized that that wasn't the case, that there was actually a lot of anger in Saudi Arabia at America for blaming them for the 9/11 attacks. And I sort of walked into that, why is the U.S. doing a 1-year anniversary about this? What's the big deal? People die all the time. It wasn't, it's not our fault, and you're now causing barriers for our students to go to school in U.S. schools, and you're, anti-Saudi. So I walked into that reporting situation, which is a great example of, for international reporting, and I do it too with domestic reporting as a reporter. I'd like to say we go into stories with no preconceptions, but you do, because you read and you listen, and my preconception was I'm going to walk into this warm and fuzzy, like, let's, kumbaya thing, and I got instead the sort of anger at the U.S. for blaming us, but in a really cordial way. I learned a ton in a few weeks in Saudi Arabia, and I wish I could have stayed longer, in terms of the relationship between our two countries, and how it's very Western in terms of culture. Clothing and music is very Western, but there's also great resentment about our Western values. So I ended up writing quite a long piece that was sort of organized around the theme of betrayal, that Saudi Arabia felt betrayed by the U.S. because they were now being blamed, and how the U.S. felt betrayed by Saudi Arabia, a longtime ally that produced these terrorists. And I still stay in touch with some of the folks I met there. There hasn't really been any kind of breakthrough in relations between the two countries, or we're still obviously allies, but it was eye-opening for me. I mean, just not at all what I expected. I went in realizing my theory of kumbaya was not going to hold up, and tried to rate, sort of what the tension was between the two countries.
One of the things you said really struck me, because when you're looking at traditional journalism versus new journalism, the research, the education effort that goes into what you're covering is really, really significant.
Yep.
And then you, in turn, are better able to educate your readers about the subject. And I'm not sure that happens as much today, especially in the new journalism environments. But it sounded like you were acquiring a lot of information, and expanding your mind on a daily basis in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and I've had other occasions where I've done some international reporting where I didn't get the time or the resources to be able to go in long enough to sort of explore the different aspects. And there have been other situations, and it's in journalism where you're sort of assigned kind of a narrow focus, like go in and find out, particularly what the government's doing about this policy. But I was sort of given a broader task of, like, go to Saudi Arabia and find out what they're thinking about Americans. I don't think that's done a lot anymore. I mean, I think what you see now is the sort of reporting where a newspaper will send, the Syrian refugee crisis, let's send somebody there for 3 days, and they'll watch the boats come up, and they'll write about the people drowning, but not kind of the bigger picture of what's going on. And I've done some of that kind of reporting too. That to me is not as satisfying personally, and is not as useful to moving international awareness and discussions when you're just going in and, doing quick hits.
And it seems to me that it leaves the reading public somewhat blind to potential issues out there, and much as was the case with 9/11. We had known about political violence, we had known about Al-Qaeda for a long, long time. We had had repeated warnings from specialists at universities and think tanks about the possibility that aircraft would be used as weapons and directed against iconic targets. So this was not something that no one had ever thought of. And yet it seems that we covered issues such as terrorism and other forms of political violence so lightly when we were spending so much time in the mid and late 90s celebrating our economic growth, that people either didn't learn or didn't pay attention to those topics. And it shocked me that so many people on 9/11 and afterward talked about being surprised by this. And for me, it was no surprise at all. It was horrible, it was disgusting, it was shocking, yes, but it was not surprising. I had expected it for quite some time. And maybe that's because I spent too much time covering this subject and reading all about it. But the surprise element to me is not where we should be in terms of these big international topics.
No, and I mean, it happens now too, right? There's a certain insider group that sees these things coming, but it's not, to regular people, it's not accessible. That information's not accessible. So you're constantly sort of caught off guard with this news. I mean, there are, on the good side, there's some niche, there's sort of some niche news outlets where you can follow particular issues now, and maybe see things coming before normal people do. But no, I think it's true. The other thing that's happened, I think, partly because of a lack of resources in journalism, is a lot of the reporting that we see globally is out of officialdom. We'll read about a new report came out, or the sort of political figures in a country will make news, and that's sort of the lens by which we're looking at the Syrian crisis, or even at the time Saudi Arabia, sort of these official pronouncements, and getting in on the ground and actually talking to regular people there, I think is a whole nother way of increasing awareness. Reports come out from this institute or that about relations between our countries. There were a bunch of reports that came out before I went to Saudi Arabia about relations between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia that made it look like things were great. Mm-hmm. And not until you're on the ground do you go, oh my God, they can't stand us. They're so mad at us that, I remember coming home from Saudi Arabia and going, I don't know for sure that there's not going to be 15 other people, hijackers on a plane. The officialdom is like relations between our countries are great. We're rooting out terrorists together. We're newly united. But on the ground, there was a huge level of anger. I think that's part of what's happened with journalism is the easier, quicker grab story is out of like a report from the Brookings Institute or or someone has a press conference and speaks about relations. But the great thing about putting reporters on the ground, which we were pretty good at for a long period of time, is that you can see beneath that.
So you mentioned that you were hopeful that international journalism might come back, if not under the traditional umbrellas, and maybe
not on the international front, but on the domestic front, is that lots of folks like me and you who have had great careers in traditional mainstream media have decided that let's try another route, and it's been the nonprofit journalism route.
So 2016 is the year of the Pulitzer Centennial, and you have been involved with Pulitzer Prize activities, including a major award shared by others at the Hartford Courant. Tell us about that and what the goal was, what you accomplished.
Okay, it was certainly a highlight of my career. I have actually two sort of Pulitzer experiences, but in 1999 I was part of a team at the Hartford Courant that was awarded the Pulitzer for breaking news for coverage of a horrible mass shooting at the state lottery headquarters. It was at a time workplace violence was sort of the big concern at the time, and there were lots of incidents of it. Not that there aren't still, but this was a particularly brutal act by a disgruntled employee who went in and to state lottery headquarters and killed, I think, 5 of his coworkers. One of whom was a sort of friend source of mine, the mayor of a town, New Britain, that I'd covered for a long time, and she was among the victims, which was really tragic. So that was a group award, and we actually donated our Pulitzer Prize to the families of the victims. It was not a happy celebration type of thing, but obviously, meant a lot to all of us to be recognized for our coverage. And then in 2007, completely different kind of story, a series of stories that I worked on with another reporter, Matt Kaufman, was a finalist for the Pulitzer in investigative reporting. And that was a series of stories I'm very proud of, developed over about a year's time when the Iraq War was probably 2 or 3 years old. And we were on, Matt and I were on the investigative team of the Hartford Courant, which was basically charged with look anywhere in the world and find, issues that you think would be of great public significance. And at the time, we were, as I'm sure you remember, we were supposed to do like a 3-day shock and awe bombing of Baghdad, and it ended up not being that way, and we needed, there was a big recruiting effort underway to try to get more guys and girls into the ranks to go fight in Iraq and Afghanistan. And for some reason, I stumbled on something that the blurb in the New York Times that said that the U.S. military was loosening its requirements for weight in order to attract more people into the service, for weight and education and something else. They were lowering the bar to get more bodies over to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I remember turning to Matt and going, I wonder if they're lowering the bar for mental health. I wonder if you can be mentally ill or mentally unstable, and because they need troops, they are not screening, or they're letting you go fight. And with that question, we ended up with a year-long project consisting of, I think, 10 stories that ended up causing quite a big national stir that basically looked at, was the U.S. military properly screening troops with mental illness so they wouldn't go be handed a gun and go off to war? The answer was no, they weren't. Were they properly treating troops who had mental health problems while they were in the war zone? The answer was no. And what happened when troops came home with PTSD and other disorders? Were they keeping them home and taking good care of them? No, they were sending them back. So that was we never left the United States. We did travel around to talk to families of different troops whose military service members had ended up either sort of having breakdowns during the war or committing suicide. But it was a pretty interesting look at what young men in the wake of 9/11 who wanted to go fight for their country, sort of how the government failed them. In some cases failed them by letting them go off to war and handing them a gun when there were clearly signs they were mentally unstable and suicidal. So we did win. We were a Pulitzer finalist for investigative reporting in that. But better than that, Congress actually ordered the Defense Department to tighten the mental health screening, treatment, and care of troops with mental health problems. And to this day, there's legislation on the books, thanks to our series, that it makes it a little bit safer, makes the screening a little bit better and treatment a little bit better for troops who have mental health problems.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Lisa Cheticle.
Thank you, John.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia, and we'll see you next time.